Hello and welcome to Legal Spill. Today we'll be covering the case of R.V. Lavallee, and with me is Bella, an expert on this subject. Hello Bella, how are you today?
Good. Thank you for having me on the podcast today.
It's my pleasure. Now, the first thing I'd like to ask you is, could you please give us a little description of the case?
Well, R.V. Lavallee is essentially about a relationship between Lavallee and their partner Russ, and how the former reacted when faced with continuous abuse and threats from Russ.
Yes, and all of this culminated to an interaction where Russ was shot by Lavallee, and she was charged with his murder, correct?
That's right. Lavallee and Russ were fighting at the party they were hosting when Russ began hitting and threatening Lavallee, saying he'd hit her once the guest left. He told Lavallee that one of them would die in the end and handed her a gun. When she held the gun to herself, planning to end her own life, and found she couldn't do it, she shot Russ in the back of the head as he began to walk away.
Wow, I would have assumed that she wouldn't have been charged, since it does sound an awful lot like self-defense to me. Any idea why she was charged and not released on grounds of self-defense?
You're not wrong. The issue with that is that given Russ was shot in the back of the head, it's safe to assume he was retreating and not attacking her at that moment, which would put her in no immediate danger and wouldn't really qualify as self-defense.
Wow, okay. You learn something new every day. But given the abuse going on, I suppose we could say she kind of just snapped. Would you say that this case brought on a big switch in our thinking regarding abusive relationships, legally?
Yeah, you're right. This case gave us more understanding of abusive relationships and the concept of battered women syndrome.
Oh, battered women syndrome. It's usually the result of long-term violence during an abusive relationship, isn't it?
It is. Most often, battered women syndrome is a product of long-term domestic abuse in a relationship, during which a person may experience depression, anxiety, guilt, shame, low self-confidence, and more. Many people don't know this, but battered women syndrome, or BWS, is actually considered a subcategory of post-traumatic stress disorder.
I've heard that Lavallee's defense brought witnesses testifying about the abuse she experienced, as well as a psychologist to speak on how battered women syndrome may have impaired her perspective on how much danger she truly was in at the time. What were some of the arguments the crowd made on trial?
Well, for the Crown, they used the fact that Russ had been shot in the back of the head to question the validity of the perceived immediate danger. The Crown also questioned if Lavallee had other options, as well as the expert witness's testimony, as it was based on hearsay from Lavallee and not actual observations of their relationship. In the end, the Crown pushed for a verdict of guilty to the charge of murder in the second degree, but they didn't get it.
Well, do you agree with this verdict of not guilty? I'm sure it caused quite an uproar, as it was newly established defense at the time. As well as it being the mid-late 80s, women's rights and spousal rights in general weren't in a great place then.
I do agree, yes. It was a newly established precedent, but it has shown to be sensible. Such trauma can certainly change the way one reacts to aggression. I mean, the two were in a relationship for years, and I truly can't imagine what she'd been through. My turn to ask a question. Would you say you agree with the verdict?
Ooh. I agree with the verdict of not guilty because I thought her fear was very reasonable. There was prior abuse and violence in the relationships, and the threats directed at her, I can see why she reacted the way she did. She genuinely believed her life was in danger, and even if it wasn't necessarily imminent to her, it was otherwise inevitable. I can't even imagine myself in her shoes, but I know that my fight or flight instincts would definitely kick in this situation.
While we think different verdicts are fitting into this case, I think we can all agree that second-degree murder is not one of them.
Oh, now on that topic, second-degree murder falls under Section 231 of the Criminal Code of Canada, yeah? How does it differ from manslaughter or first-degree murder?
That's correct. The definition of secondary murder is the act of taking a life that is deliberate but not planned. The differences are slight, but they can really change your sentence. Manslaughter is the non-deliberate, unplanned act of taking someone's life, while first-degree murder is both deliberate and planned. Really, at its core, it all boils down to intent, or mens rea versus actus reus.
Ooh, actus reus and mens rea, guilty mind and guilty action. I heard of this trial being used as a case study or like a reference for another case in the past. Have they all been successful? I'm assuming you're required to prove battered woman syndrome. So I'm just wondering if there were any cases you know of where this mental disorder has been abused for other causes.
Well, there have been a dozen cases where Lavallee was referenced, including R.V. Malott, where Margaret Malott shot and killed her common-law husband and tried to shoot his girlfriend after suffering years of physical, sexual, psychological, and emotional abuse. But it was unsuccessful and she was still found guilty of second-degree murder.
Oh, why was it unsuccessful in this case when it clearly led to a favorable outcome for Lavallee? Was battered woman syndrome not proven in this case?
Interestingly enough, no. A psychological evaluation was actually conducted and it was proven that she did suffer from BWS, but the fact that she had planned out her actions showed that she had the intent to cause serious harm, unlike Lavallee, who acted out of immediate defense in the moment.
So, given the actions and the consequences, the judge's and the jury's role is to try and decipher the intent of the defendant based on the provided evidence.
Yeah, pretty much.
Oh, so if there's so many other cases with relatively similar situations or outcomes, what makes this specific case so important to us?
Well, this specific case was one of the first to expose how the self-defense laws failed to protect victims living in abusive relationships. It really exposed a gap in the law.
Oh, so it basically forced the court to accept the violence and abuse doesn't always appear in one single moment, and that it's often a continuous cycle that escalates over time. What did this realization lead to in the long term?
Yes, that's actually a pretty fitting description. Well, from this point, the court allowed expert evidence on battered woman syndrome for the first time, which gave juries a way to understand how abuse affects the victim's perception of danger. It also expanded the definition of self-defense to protect the victim of abuse in cases where danger may not have been immediate but imminent.
And looking beyond Lavallee as an individual, did this case lead to any major social change in the perception and treatment of abused spouse?
Well, socially, this case changed the way people think about domestic abuse. It really changed the idea that a person could simply leave and help the public see how domestic violence involves not only physical harm, but also fear, manipulation, and control. It raised awareness and gave more credibility to the victims in abusive situations.
Wow, what an impact. So it really was the turning point for opinions on abuse that we see today.
Yeah.
I can't imagine how many people this impacted.
Yeah, it was really fantastic.
Well, it's been really fantastic talking to you. I don't want to keep you for too long, but I do have one final question. Do you think that this case makes a real impact on the individual victims of domestic abuse, not just legally?
Absolutely, I do. To be a victim of partner abuse, it's not just hard, it's life-changing. It makes you lose trust in people, the justice system, and the systems that are in place to protect you. To be able to rectify that by not only providing a legal defense, but also by bringing recognition and closure to victims, it truly prevents already traumatized victims from being victimized by the justice system that is supposed to protect them.
Oh, so what you're saying is this was an oversight by the justice system and that this case remedied that?
Yeah, that's it exactly.
Well, thank you so much for coming in to talk to me. I really appreciate you answering so many of my questions.
Thank you for having me.
That was our legal expert, Bella, discussing the case of R.V. Lavallee, a case that shaped our perspective and the legalities of abuse to this day. Thanks for listening to Legal Spill.